don't you? You love these.
Welcome everybody. I'm having a fantastic guest for you today. His name is Tim Haywood. He is the GM and the Senior Vice President of Walton. Tim, welcome to my 8th podcast.
Thank you, Simon. Great to be here. I know you've been asking me a number of times, so I'm glad to finally be able to be here with you after a prolonged Christmas trip and COVID in the UK and various other things. So great to be here. Thank you for having me.
You played hard to get, but eventually I got you.
Yeah.
So Tim, tell me more about yourself. Who is Tim? Where you're from? What's your life story? I want to know it all.
Everything? Are you sure?
Not everything, but just the nice, juicy things.
Yeah. So I'm from the UK originally. I've been offshore for 20 years. I grew up in the south of England. My father was in the Royal Navy, so I was lucky enough to go to private school in the UK. And when I was 25, I had an opportunity through redundancy to look outside of the UK for opportunities. And I ended up jumping on a plane, going to Hong Kong. And I spent the next 18 years in Hong Kong. I met my wife, who's from Indonesia, over there. Had our kids over there, both born in Hong Kong. And then had an opportunity to come across to the UAE. In fact, I was traveling to the UK for business for a number of years. And then an opportunity came for us to relocate over here. And so we moved here to Dubai at the end of 2019, which was, of course, very interesting timing, both from what was happening in Hong Kong, but also in terms of what was about to happen globally with the pandemic. And I've been here since. So it's been an interesting 20 years, shall we say. Went over to Hong Kong with £5,000 in my bank account, which was basically what we were told we needed, a one-way ticket, and that was the opportunity. And at the time I was working in the wealth management sector for an independent firm in Hong Kong who had offices around Asia as well. And it was just purely an opportunity. And here we are today, all grown up with kids and married and in Dubai. So the journey continues.
That's fantastic. And Tim, how is it to live in Hong Kong?
It was fantastic. It's a vibrant city. If you're a foodie, it's heaven.
I am foodie.
Yeah, it's fantastic. You can get every cuisine under the sun there. And we had a great time. You know, it's definitely a sort of a work hard, play hard city, and I think that you can get the most out of that. It's very business friendly. It's very pro business, and it was a great time. It has changed somewhat now, obviously, which is well documented in the media, but still, I think it's a vibrant city. It's still, in many respects, the gateway to China. And we've had a base there as a company for 26 years. So it's been a long time that we've been there as a business. But it's kind of home for me in some respects. I spent a good part of my life there. I'm a permanent resident of Hong Kong. So I've got the right to go back there any time I like and work freely. But yeah, as a city, it's fantastic. And of course, from Hong Kong, you've got access to the whole of sort of Asia, Southeast Asia, Thailand, Vietnam, Indonesia, north up into China. So it's a great springboard to be able to, make the most of your time. And I know you love traveling, so
do you love traveling as well?
I like traveling, but I regret I didn't do enough of it because of kids and various other things. And but yeah, it's a great place to be able to just go for a short, sharp weekend away to somewhere like Thailand or like Vietnam or whatever. And it's fantastic. But I think also a lot of people don't realise just how open Hong Kong is as well. They see the famous skyline of Hong Kong, and what they miss is the country parks, the beaches. The fact that it's absolutely stunning as a location. So yeah, it was great times. I do miss it. I do miss it. But home is here now. We move on.
Well, it's good to hear because actually we have an office there, and I'm always wondering. I like the old Hong Kong movies,
Yep, yep.
The Bruce Lee movies um, and the other movies from the 80s and the 90s. And they always showcase, the islands around Hong Kong. And
Yeah, absolutely.
um,
Great if you like to go and have some seafood lunches and jump on a junk boat and take a nice trip over for a day. Great times, good fun.
yeah, and how is the transformation from Hong Kong to Dubai? You said you did it in 2018,
2019.
2019. I think you know Daniel, who helped you with that process of company setup.
Probably.
Yeah. So the thing is that you're coming from the UK, you're going to Hong Kong, and then you go from Hong Kong to Dubai. How did you find that transformation?
It was exciting. I think as much as anything. I think you get to a point in an expat posting, shall we say, where you're wondering what the next move is. And some people, bear in mind, most people go as an expatriate, they might disappear for, we'll give it 2 years and see what happens. And 15, 20 years later, they're still living there.
Yeah.
And that was very much what happened with us. So kind of 18 years on, we'd started having thoughts about, what the next move might be. And I think as most expatriates find, the pull of family is constant. I think, with our family, with my parents, they're obviously getting older. My nieces and nephews are growing up. And so there was always, I guess, a little bit of a pull as to making a move back towards the UK without going back to the UK, because the two are very different.
Yes.
And I'd been coming over to Dubai anyway for business for about 4 or 5 years up to that point anyway. So it was a natural fit, and I think the transition was quite easy because Dubai, again, much like Hong Kong, is very much open for business. I think we've certainly seen that, particularly over the last couple of years with the pandemic, and what that's brought to all of us as business people. But as a family, I think the biggest thing for us was space. Dubai, you've got that much more space than you do in Hong Kong, which is a very crowded, a city. And so for us, having that living space, having that open space, was kind of made the transition that much easier.
So just for people that don't know, how big is a 2 or 3 bedroom in Hong Kong, and what do you pay for if it's in a good location?
I'm a little bit out of touch, but I mean certainly we were kind of the centre of the island, sort of between the main business districts, or not far from the main business districts. And we were in a 3-bedroom apartment, which was about 850 square foot. So what's that, 85 square meters or so, which is not that big, but for Hong Kong that was a pretty decent size.
Yeah.
That was a pretty decent size. And we were paying what we now pay for a 3-bedroom, 1,600 square foot apartment. So the price is actually fairly similar, but what you get for your money is obviously that much bigger.
I see. Yeah, and then when you have 2 children, right?
Yeah, two kids. Yeah,
and boys, right?
1 boy, 1 girl.
Boy, yeah. Well, when they grow up, they also need space.
Yeah, definitely. And my son had the small room in Hong Kong. He now has the biggest room in in Dubai.
He came in and he was like, "The master bedroom is mine."
Well, it kind of worked out. The decision was made for him because the place where we live, one of the bedrooms had superhero wallpaper all over it. The Hulk and Spider-Man and everything else. So by default, it ended up being his bedroom, which worked out well for him. But yeah, it's been a good move, and I think that sort of space that you get is, when you've got a young family growing up, it's all important. And of course, in Dubai, you get the facilities with that. You get the communal pool and the gyms and all of that. So it works well.
And probably not a bad move, considering that if you moved here in 2019, that already, because Hong Kong got hit at the first stage of the lockdowns in the world together with China, then you would have been for a long time inside of your apartment
Yeah,
in Hong Kong.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've got, we've got 47 colleagues back in Hong Kong who, have to face the lockdown situation, the quarantines, the closing of restaurants, and yet here we are in Dubai with a pretty open, freedom to work and to travel and to, dine out and eat out. And I think we're very lucky,
Absolutely.
And I think part of that is the early reaction that the rulers put in place in terms of a short, sharp, significant lockdown. I think that probably worked well, as tough as it was to deal with at the time. Hong Kong's taken a slightly different approach, and they've kind of insulated themselves from the world, which, is questionable tactics. And I think, our ability to go back to Hong Kong at the moment, when you've got to do a 3-week quarantine, there is no option to go back really. And I think that's causing its own problems in Hong Kong as well. But, every country runs their own policy, and, that's the way it is.
Yeah, true. And you started in the wealth management industry, and then you made a transition when you joined Walton.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit more about Walton? Who is Walton? Where they're from? How old are they? What do they do?
Yeah, sure. So Walton is a private family-run business. We've been around for over 43 years, and ultimately we are a land asset management company. We're headquartered in the United States, in Scottsdale, Arizona, and we administer around 98,000 acres of land assets in the United States and Canada, with the majority of those being in the US. And we basically take land positions in the US, which are lands which are suitable for future residential development. We work very closely with home builders, and we prepare those lands with those home builders ready for the future development for residential purposes. And through that process, we're able to deliver investment opportunities for clients to participate in that process and generate returns based on that process. So, we've been doing this a long time, and we've got some fantastic relationships. We've got offices throughout North America and the world. The Middle East was an opportunity to put our flag in the ground over here and set up our first office here in Dubai.
Yeah. You guys also got Sharia law compliant?
We do. So we had it already out of Singapore, because of course there's a significant Muslim population in Southeast Asia as well, and in Singapore. But when we moved over here, we realized that the quality of the Sharia scholar is also important. And so one of the things we did early on was we went to a partner over here who's based out of DIFC, and we sought the approval there, which we were granted. So yeah, we offer a Sharia compliant opportunity, which of course is important for the region.
Yes, which also underlines the ethical part and the transparent part that you are having in your offering.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you obviously have to adhere to certain standards, and that is something that we've had reviewed. All of our contracts reviewed, and yeah, that's something we're proud of.
Great. And what kind of stakeholders do you work with? You said already home builders, but just for somebody that is not familiar with your company, like who do you work with? What do they do? Why are they needed to cooperate with?
Yeah, so we deal with the top 20 home builders, or many of the top 20 home builders in the United States. And these home builders are typically well-capitalized companies. Typically they're publicly traded home builders, and they are building a phenomenal number of homes every year throughout the US to meet the residential demand. And what we've seen over the last number of years is a lot of those home builders have moved to running what we term as a land-light strategy, where they will hold a certain amount of land on their own balance sheet for their future development purposes. But anything that's much longer than probably 18 to 24 months, they look to secure that future land inventory through option agreements. And what an option agreement does is it allows them in simple terms to secure the land today, but pay for it as and when they need it down the line. And so that presents an opportunity for a large land asset management company like Walton to provide those pipeline of assets for their future development requirements. And so we work with these home builders very closely. We work with them from the start of the process, where we are researching and acquiring those assets, and we give them a view of those assets, and obviously all the due diligence work. And sometimes they bring those assets to us as well for consideration. And if they meet our acquisition criteria, then we may work in partnership with them.
Okay, and outside of home builders, do you also work with other partners, like, for example, research and analysts, surveyors, etc.?
Yeah, we do. I mean, part of the due diligence process is we can't do everything ourselves.
Yeah.
So, and we're not arrogant enough to believe we can. Mm-hmm. So we do work with engineering consultants. We work with market analysts who provide us with immense amount of housing data, land absorption data, lot prices, home prices, all of that, because that all filters into our modelling, into our financial modelling of the projects. So yeah, we work very closely with them, and you know, that's part and parcel of the process, and we manage the entire process internally through our team in-house. So it's very much a collaborative approach, not only with the analysts, the engineering consultants, but also the home builders as well, who we obviously need to have a lot of opening dialogue with as well, and ultimately also the municipalities and the cities, who we're working with very closely to have all of the plans approved on those projects.
That's great, and I want to talk a little bit more about the home builders. Before I do that, I first want to make a small jump towards the concept of land. Mm-hmm. Because maybe a lot of our audience is from maybe Dubai or GCC, or from big cities in Asia where there's a high skyline, a lot of skyscrapers. Now, US and Europe also to a large extent, they used to do this in the past. Just look at New York, yeah, or the skyline that they built in the 20s and the 30s, iconic buildings. And then suddenly, since the Second World War, they just stopped focusing on skyscrapers. There's a whole concept behind it as well, that it's not value for money as well, depreciation of the maintenance, etc. But I don't want to go too deep into that. I just want to highlight, maybe you can add it a little bit more towards my comments, is that they need much more land because of the way that they build new properties. They build houses, big houses in the US, yeah, with nice gardens, and that just requires a lot of new land every time they make a new property, compared to an 80-store building, yeah, where you can put maybe 500 or 600 families in it. Can you please feel free to comment on that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, ultimately, land is the raw material for future development. Without it, you can't do anything. So, understanding the fundamentals of growth in a country, in a market, in a region. What we look for, particularly in the US, is strong population growth numbers. We look for strong employment numbers and job creation, and of course home building activity. And the simple fact is that the US builds an awful lot of homes because there's a big population and there's strong demand for new affordable homes in these high growth areas. And so really, when you consider that last year the US Last year, the US housing start numbers were about 1.7 million new homes started throughout the year.
Wow.
Or for the year, rather. So what you can appreciate there is that's an awful lot of new homes being built. Of those, just under 1.2 million were what we would call single-family detached homes. So not your condominiums, not your multi-family homes, but your individual standalone homes on a single development lot. And so, again, just under 1.2 million homes, you can imagine that absorbs an awful lot of land.
Yes.
So the opportunity is to understand where that growth is occurring, where the home builders are active, the kind of assets they're looking for, and then of course plug into that and select your land accordingly.
Yeah, because there's a lot of interesting movements happening there. So you have the history of the United States, where the settlers came in and they were always moving towards a new destination, from starting at the East Coast and ending up in California on the West Coast. So there's always this underlying history that they like to move. But now you also see that big companies in California, for example, like Apple and other big tech companies, are moving a large part of their headquarters and offices towards different states, where the cost of living is cheaper, where the taxes are lower, where the weather is also friendly, but maybe not as aggressive with the forest fires and the smog in California in the cities. So how do you play into that trend?
Yeah, I mean, certainly the movement of people throughout the US is something which has been happening for decades. And again, as you touched on, is driven by factors such as affordability, jobs, and people will move across the US in search of those. And when it comes to a region, you then need to look at the pro-growth mentality, or the pro-growth government that's in place. Is it a region that is saying that's opening their doors up for businesses and say, well, don't stay in California, come across to Texas, for example.
Yeah.
Open up new facilities here in Texas, and we will help you. We will work with you, because if you create jobs in our market, that's good for us.
Yeah.
That's good for our tax-paying base, everything that comes with that. So it follows, therefore, that those companies do look, because they're sometimes incentivized, through business tax incentives and the like, to move into an area. And all of these big companies, we saw it a few years ago, where, I think it was Facebook at the time, and maybe we'll correct that, but one of these big companies who go out to tender to find a new location for their headquarters, and they literally go through all of these areas, these regions, to understand what that's going to look like for them from a business perspective. And of course they go through a selection process. They invite these regions to put it out to go to tender effectively, and then of course they make a decision, and there's a big fanfare, and everyone's very happy, because guess what, whoever is coming to Texas or to Georgia or wherever it might be. So that's something which happens for sure, and you just need to understand that, and you understand where population is moving to, where net domestic migration is occurring, and where jobs are being created. And of course, you can very simply see where the homes are being built, because that's where the big home builders are active. And so you're able to plug into that to understand the demographic shifts that are taking place, and the opportunities, therefore, that lie within those areas.
Yeah, so I want to talk a little bit more about that, because the States works a little bit different, because it's one country, but they're quite independent. And they also have their own taxes that they collect, and some of them vary quite different from state to state. It's quite strange that within one country you have these states tendering and fighting each other to be competitive, and that actually has a big effect on the ground. I remember stories where Apple, because they're so big in the country where they are, so powerful, that when something happens and they don't like it, they say, well, we might leave. And then they get quite intimidated by it, the county, and this leads to them being a little bit the boss of the area. And they came to, when in Ireland, they got slapped on their fingers by the European Commission, because they were not paying taxes, and they asked Ireland to go after them. Tim Cook said at one point, well, we might take our business somewhere else then, because they're used to that, to say that. And there was just utter silence on the other side of the ocean.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Europe was like, well, go ahead then, take your business away. We have one of the biggest consumer markets in the world. I'm sure there's another company that wants to fill up your space.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit the other side of the coin, where they are not at all accepting to be intimidated by companies, to be competitive within countries. They are competitive country to country, France against Netherlands, Germany, etc. But that's also being more aligned now, that they try to have one strategy. But in the States, you see this still going on.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's about what's right for your business. It's about areas that are embracing you as a business, providing you with benefits, but also from a business perspective, it's about, you know, the quality of life of your workforce. It's about the affordability. You know, home prices in parts of California are, you know, forgive the pun, but through the roof. You can move into another part of the country and your affordability factor is much greater.
Yeah.
So that's a benefit, obviously, to the workforce as well. So yeah, I mean, overall, it happens, and it's part of what goes on in the US. But I think that, you know, companies aren't going to get up and move unless there's a real valid reason to do so. And remember as well, they're not necessarily removing themselves from an existing location. They might be opening additional facilities, additional plants, you know, and keeping a headquarters over there, but bringing perhaps a regional headquarters into a region. So you know, it's not kind of it's them or us. It's we're that big. We've got to be able to expand into these other markets.
Yes, and then Walton, because of their research, because of their partnerships, because of their experience, they kind of forecast where the demand will go to which states, which areas, and then you buy and find strategic land where actually the people will come.
Yeah, I mean, there's an awful lot of research that goes into it. You know, it's not Walton's proprietary research, as I mentioned. We do work with a lot of other parties who help us with that process. But a lot of it, of course, is freely available information. And again, there's a pretty good indication that where the home builders are active, there's a good story to be had there. So, you know, we do work closely with those home builders. And as I say, sometimes they bring assets to us. Sometimes we find them ourselves. You know, we're well known in the market, being a dominant landowner that we are. So opportunities are presented to us, and it's our job then to go and research those and do our own due diligence on them to assess them.
Yes, and for example, I have a client. He works for Apple, and he was just always telling me stories when he goes, you know, to the U.S. and speaks with his colleagues how life is there, and actually he also invested in Walton, so he took some more interest into what's going on. And one of the things that I told him already before it happened is I said, you know, Texas will be a place where high demand will be. And he ended up buying some land through Walton in Texas. And then he came back with stories saying, well, actually Apple is expanding their presence in Texas. Talking with colleagues there, and they are over the moon, and they're paying less taxes. And they said instead of a very small 2-bedroom apartment for maybe half of the price now, they're getting a 5-bedroom apartment, a 5-bedroom house, standalone with a big garden in Texas, and they just cannot believe it that it's so cheap according to them. They're having still their California salaries.
Yeah.
And here you go, a success story where things were, you know, put in place to land those future demand.
Yeah, and affordability is a big factor in the US housing market. You know, ultimately people do move because of affordability.
Yes.
There's an expression in the US which is drive till you qualify, which basically means if you can't afford a certain location, you keep driving on the interstate until you can. Which I think is
because gasoline is cheap as well.
Yeah, exactly. Which I think is quite a nice kind of expression, and it really illustrates the point. And of course, with what we've seen in the last couple of years with the pandemic, and people working from home more and more, you know, I know that you have, I know that I have. You know, that commute into an office location is not necessarily as prevalent as it was, and it's certainly not necessarily a daily routine. And so with that, people can afford to move a bit further away, where they've got a bit more affordability, where they can afford a bit more space, and perhaps have a home office or something like that as well. And so again, it's really accelerated what was happening anyway, the move into the suburbs, but it's really been accelerated over the last couple of years.
Absolutely, and some companies are even saying don't come back to the office, or some companies are saying you can work from home indefinitely. And then, where do you want to work? You can love the city center, but when you don't know if everything is open, you can be in a 60 square meter apartment, which is still great, and you're still in the middle of the center, but you can also be in a big house where everybody fits in properly. Yeah. You have your office set up, and then whenever you want, you drive towards the city center and have a nice day.
Yeah, and as you know, with a growing family, space is everything, and as your house fills up with more and more toys, you'll understand this over the next few years. But yeah, definitely.
Well, they're my toys, huh? I play with them.
Yeah, we all love Lego. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, people are moving into these locations away from, perhaps more downtown urban centres where they've been renting, even of course after the subprime crisis, people living at home and gradually building deposits and then getting married and having families, and they want their own space. And so really something which, as I say, has been happening for generations anyway, has been even more accelerated by what we've seen in the last few years.
And that's by itself is a topic I think we can talk about for an whole hour, that urbanization. Yeah. Oh, the forecasts were like bigger cities, more people will come to the city to find jobs. And I mean, if you said 5 or 10 years ago that there will be a trend difference, people will put you in the nut house. Yeah. They're like, which data? Where would this come from? Yeah. And here we are.
2.5 years later, and it's still going on.
Yes. People are moving to the suburbs. People are moving outside of city centers. People are moving towards space. Yeah,
and I think, it's not just the US, it's happening in the UK. I'm sure it's happening
Netherlands as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's happening here as well. I mean, in Dubai, what we've seen is, the demand for villas, living that bit further out, because people are reassessing, I think, their lifestyle, their work-life balance. And I think it's happening on a global basis. It's not just the US. But obviously for what we do, everything we do is US centric. But yeah, definitely it's something that we all deal with on a daily basis. And I think that, having that ability to reassess and say, well, hang on, do I need to be in an office for my job? Do I need to, be in a downtown location if I do have an office? And that whole idea of either working remotely or reassessing where your office location might be, I think, we've all taken a step back over the last few years and looked at that quite closely.
Yeah, so I mean, personally, I love working from home. I enjoyed it a lot during COVID. I still do. I was a little bit hesitant if it would still work because I got, my second daughter got born and she's newborn, and it's busy, right? My wife is at home, not working. Baby is there now. Mother-in-law is visiting. So I was like, okay, I should go back to the office. So I tried to go back to the office, and then, of course, because of the new wave, they kind of want you to work from home again. Yeah. And it works fine, actually, because, I can switch between my meetings and my proposals that I'm sending and communication that I'm having towards, helping out, with what's going on. And I would miss out on all those moments if I could not work at home, if that was not an option.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was told by previous employers that if you don't come to the office, we had a fine system at one company. You don't come, and they will fine you for not coming. That's how strict it was. Yeah. I mean, that's of course a little bit too extreme, but it would just show how drastic things are changing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I think it's been an interesting couple of years from that perspective alone, just in terms of how we have reassessed our lives and how we have adapted. And I know that certainly within our company, I was expecting to have gone back to Hong Kong, a couple of times a year and continued looking after and
Say
managing
hello to
relationships.
your colleagues.
Say hello to my colleagues.
And
Hi,
your
I'm still here.
friends.
Remember me? And I haven't been able to. And that's, as a business for us overall, we've adapted very well to Zoom and to MS Teams and using technology. We've had a series of early morning conference calls to the US over the last few weeks, which are our asset manager updates on our projects internally. And for me, they're about 5 o'clock in the morning, so they're quite interesting to set the alarm for. But we adapt, and I think we've all accepted the fact that we're in an environment where remote working works, where we can be disciplined, but it's also more efficient for all of our times. And I know that you guys have adapted to that as well, because I've done webinars for you that we do, and I've done.
We never did webinars before.
I've done Zoom calls, not specifically for you, but with
yeah.
yeah. But yeah, so I think we have all adapted, and I think it makes life a little more interesting in the sense of just being able to be more efficient, and as you say, benefit from being able to help with the baby or do whatever you need to do.
Yeah, funny side note, by the time that we will release this podcast, it already happened, but there's also a Dubai real estate webinar that I'm doing, where we'll talk with a real estate expert about the Dubai real estate situation.
Yeah.
So the interesting part is you're completely right. I can suddenly provide a different platform for people to communicate with and for people also to tune in. And also now we're doing this podcast. I'm sure we will do more webinars in the future as well.
Absolutely.
Together. And this is great because people can tune in from anywhere they are in the world. I think this whole COVID has definitely helped us to be able to make that transformation into a new way of living and working. Something that maybe we needed, but we were not able to do just by ourselves.
Bit of a reset.
Yes, a reset, and your situation as well. I think is that where you're coming from as well, from the U.S. home market, is also that. A lot of people don't know this maybe, but how quickly do they build homes in the U.S.? Because they do it a little bit different. They don't do it like in Europe, for example.
Yeah. So the U.S. Home building is done kind of what they call stick and frame. So everything is kind of lumber framed or timber framed.
Yeah.
And then they whack it up sort of thereafter.
They whack it up.
They whack it up. No, I shouldn't say it like
that. No. But I mean, whack it up because I've seen videos how fast that goes. How quickly can you have a 5-bedroom, 250, 300 square meter home finished?
Oh, I don't know.
Approximately.
I guess maybe 3 to 6 months, something like that.
3 to 6 months. Here you go. If I go back home and if I go to the Netherlands and I say, guys, who can build this for me? They will say, take a walk. Yeah. Permission, this. We need to do this. We know the bricks. We need to put layers after layers, and by the time they're finished, it's definitely not going to be 3 to 6 months. Now, the benefit from that is that they can build fast.
Yeah, they can, absolutely. And I think that when you've got a demand that you do in the US, you need to be able to get those homes up pretty quickly. And that's the challenge. I mean, that's one of the challenges at the moment is the supply side. Mm-hmm. The industry reckons that there's anywhere between 4.5 to 6 million homes shortage in the US right now in terms of to meet the demand. And part of the problem with that is obviously cost of timber has skyrocketed over the last few years. Labour in terms of access to labour, but also labour costs. So there are a number of challenges to the market.
But this will put pressure on building the homes.
Yeah, it does. It puts pressure on building the homes, and that's why there's a supply side challenge at the moment. They can't build homes quick enough to meet the demand from the buyers.
But it will also be more expensive to build.
Yeah, it will as well, and that's why you see price pressure on existing inventory as well. There's a number of different challenges in the market which are kind of keeping a lid on the supply side, which is good ultimately for what we do, because you don't want a bubble market. You don't want all of a sudden an overbuild or an oversupply. And that's what you saw in 2007, 2008, before subprime kicked in.
Yeah, but it was also possible with no income that you can get 5 mortgages and stuff like that.
Yeah, lending standards were, should we say, relaxed.
I mean, where is that possible? I don't have a job, I don't have an income, but I can buy 5 properties.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was part of the problem, of course. It was very lax lending standards. There was an oversupply in the market to meet that demand, that speculative demand.
Yeah.
And lessons were learned. And I think that's why we're in a position that we are now, where there is a tight supply. Yes, there is price pressure on existing inventory, but you don't have a frenzied lending environment.
So have you seen the movie The Big Short?
Yes, I have.
Do you love it?
Yeah, I do.
How many times have you seen it?
A couple.
Here you go. Yeah, so I watch it at least once a year. I also forced my wife to watch it at least once with me, and she loves it as well now. I mean, she's not really into that.
That's her financial education, is it?
Exactly. I'm like, look, you're just going to sit here and you're going to love it, And I don't know if you know Succession, the TV show.
No, I don't.
So one of the actors in The Big Short is now also in Succession. He's not very known, but he's just a very good actor. But The Big Short really talks about like before the crash. They remember when they went for like underground, and they flew to, I think it was Florida.
Was it Florida or Arizona? I can't remember.
And they went around houses, knocking on the doors, seeing who's living there. They also went to speak with homeowners and real estate agents, like what's happening, is there a bubble or not?
Yeah.
And I think one of the things you told me is that even during the worst times after the crash, which was the biggest crash in our lifetime, in the past 80 years, they were still building new homes.
They were still building new homes.
There was still demand.
Yeah. It was weakened massively, and they were building less homes than they've ever built before. But they, at the depths of the crisis, which would have been about 2009 from a home building perspective, they were still building just under 500,000 homes a year. So
wow. It's still a lot of homes.
Still a lot of homes, yeah. They never stopped building. And I think that's sort of part of the confidence that we can take in terms of going forward. As I say, the understanding in the industry is there's no bubble because there's non-oversupply. The bubble is perhaps on the price point side in terms of very inflated. But again, I think last year there was year-on-year growth over the last couple of years of 15-16% in terms of existing inventory, and so that has to rationalise, that has to correct, because that's unsustainable. And I think that what the industry is looking at over the next couple of years is perhaps year-on-year growth of maybe 6 to 10%,
which is still very high.
Which is still very healthy, but it's just not excessive. So I think again, the market's kind of taking care of itself to an extent.
Yeah, and maybe instead of if you see high growth, and that is changed to good growth, the only difference is that there's still demand. It's just that people are not willing to pay as high prices as before. Yeah. And like you said, there's a shortage in the market, so maybe people just want a little bit better pricing point or more affordable homes, and they still need to be built on land.
Absolutely.
You're not going to knock down somebody's house and say, I'm going to build a new house there for me.
Unless you start reclaiming from the ocean, then...
Yeah, which is very expensive.
Absolutely.
And you need to have technology and everything. I mean, we are in the Netherlands, they're the #1 country when it comes to reclaiming land historically, because half of the land is underwater. Yeah. It's very expensive. You need years of knowledge for it, and sometimes it's just not even value for money. Yeah. It's so in the US, why would they reclaim?
They don't need to. They've got an abundance of land.
Exactly, but in a national park you cannot build a city.
No. So it's of course about understanding where you can build, where you can develop, which land is suitable for large scale residential development, because there are constraints, of course, whether it be topography, whether it be water, whatever it might be. You obviously have to take all of that into consideration, because that will affect the developability of those lands. So definitely it's all part of the due diligence that we work through, and that's why we work with our engineers and the like very carefully.
Yes, and also, you know, when you have a city center and you have a city, people will drive, but away from the place where they're working, up to a certain point.
Yeah.
There's also a point where you say, wow, there I will never live.
Yeah.
Because what do I have there? What infrastructure do I have? What schools, what supermarkets, hospitals, etc. are there? So you can only push up to a certain level when you want to find a new place.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of places, and what people sort of perhaps don't realise in the US, is the way that master plan developments are created, and new school districts are created, obviously amenities are created, and generally speaking, you've seen that it's kind of corridor specific, so it follows the main interstate highways or main state highways. And these master plan developments grow up, and they're very heavily amenitized. They've got access. They've got new schools, and the US builds in that way. So, you know, again, you end up with maybe a 30-40 minute commute out of a downtown location, but you've still got all the amenities on your doorstep.
Exactly. So my last question for our podcast together is, what is your outlook for the future in your industry?
Yeah, so I think, as we've touched on, the demand is there. The population isn't disappearing. The demand for affordable housing, market by market, is pretty robust. And even notwithstanding, you know, some corrections in the market, shall we say, I think that longer term demand is there, and the need therefore for land will always be present. Home builders typically look to acquire land for their future development pipeline, and that might be 3, 4, 5 years out. So as long as they've got a view on what they're going to need for the future development cycles, then of course we're in the market to be able to provide that for them. So we're pretty bullish about things, notwithstanding sort of short-term you know, cycles and softening of the market, which we could see, but I think the longer term trends are pretty robust, and we're working very closely with the home builders to provide them with the assets they need. Excellent.
Tim, I want to thank you so much for coming. It was my pleasure to host you and to have you as my guest. Time flew. I'm looking at the clock and I'm like,
it really did. Wow.
It is already like, yeah. So Tim, thank
you very
much.
Thank you, Simon, so much. Thank you for your support, and it's been great to be on the podcast with you.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.